In this video, we'll see some of the history of deep learning. Without this historical perspective, this overview of deep learning wouldn't be complete because we're actually already in the third wave of popularity of neural networks, and there have been two such waves before, both of which were followed by a decline in the popularity of neural networks. So let's dive right in. The history of deep learning. The history of deep learning actually goes back to a simple abstract view of how information processing works in the brain. And that's why we'll first talk about this for a bit. In our brains, there are lots of neurons. And each of these neurons has a set of so-called dendrites through which information arrives in the neuron's cell body. This information takes the form of electric pulses that arrive at the cell body. And in the cell's body, there is a so-called membrane potential. And if this potential exceeds a certain threshold, then the cell actually fires. What it means for a cell to fire is that it releases an electric pulse that travels along this axon here towards synapses that connect to other neurons. So here is a synapse, there's a synapse, and each of these are connecting to other neurons. At these synapses, there are so-called neurotransmitters that are being released, and they allow for an information flow through the network of neurons. It is hypothesized that learning actually corresponds to a change in the weight of these synapses. So the weight of one of these synapses tells you how strongly our neuron is connected to the neuron that the synapse connects to. And when our neuron fires, this synaptic weight tells us how strongly the following neuron is affected. That's exactly what the weights in our artificial neural networks mean. This is how you can see the computations that our artificial neural networks do as an abstract view of information processing in the human brain. And this perspective is actually how neural networks first started in the 1940s, in the first wave of deep learning. In those days, under the name of artificial neural networks or cybernetics, in 1943 already, artificial neural networks were first introduced as a model of brain function by McCulloch and Pitts. In 1949, local learning rules were developed by Hebb in order to hypothesize how you could actually train these neural networks. Then, a very influential publication was the Rosenblatt perceptron in 1958, which was basically a single layer neural network. And while this was only a linear network, already in 1960, there were already versions of stochastic gradient descent training neural networks. However, at that time, the popularity of neural networks actually declined for the first time. This was because there were overblown claims. People started to think that they have this model that works exactly like the brain, so that a major improvement must be imminent. And these overblown claims, together with a simple negative result that was proven by Minsky and Papert, led to a backlash against biologically inspired learning. And the simple negative result was that Rosenblatt perceptrons cannot actually model even a simple XOR function. And these Rosenblatt perceptrons are linear models, and that's why it makes a lot of sense that they can't model a XOR function because the XOR function isn't linearly separable. So then it took actually quite a while until the next wave of deep learning happened from 1980 to the early 2000s under the name of Connectionism. In 1980, Fukushima developed this model that's called a neocognitron, which was a multi-layer hierarchical neural network that actually had a lot of the traits of a modern convolutional neural network already. And it was actually also applied to character recognition. In 1986, Rumelhart and colleagues developed the backpropagation algorithm. And it was also applied to multi-layer perceptrons at that time, which got rid of the limitations of the single-layer perceptrons, since, well, multi-layer perceptrons can also model nonlinear functions. Then in 1989, actually autoencoders were developed and convolutional neural networks by Yann LeCun and colleagues. So those are really the modern type of convolutional neural networks. So in 1989, we actually already had a lot of the technologies that we are still using nowadays. And in 1997, the famous recurrent neural network type of long short-term memory, LSTMs, were developed by Hochreiter and Schmidhuber. Nevertheless, there was a second time that the popularity of neural networks declined. Because, well, there were ventures that actually made unrealistically ambitious claims based on neural networks that couldn't actually fulfill those unreasonable expectations. And researchers couldn't train very large neural networks because there wasn't actually enough data and there wasn't enough compute power. And they didn't have the very fast GPUs back then that we have now. And of course, they also didn't have the same sort of tricks and the training algorithms that we have these days. So as a result, AI research couldn't fulfill the unreasonable expectations that were created by these ventures. And in contrast to neural networks, other fields of machine learning actually made several advances. For example, support vector machines were very popular, and also graphical models were popular. Support vector machines were indeed the state of the art on many datasets, because back then the datasets were actually small. And so support vector machines actually work very well and out of the box. And specialized convolutional neural networks still held the state of the art on the MNIST dataset of handwritten character recognition, but they didn't really scale to a lot of other applications. And it took until the mid-2000s until the field got reinvigorated. Particularly, Jeff Hinton and colleagues and his group worked on greedy layer-wise pre-training, which made it possible to train much deeper neural networks. Only a little bit after, however, several groups actually resurrected this idea of training very large neural networks supervisedly using large amounts of data. And then actually layer-wise pre-training wasn't actually necessary anymore, but you could actually just train in an end-to-end fashion as we do nowadays. A very important instantiation of this end-to-end training was Alex Krzyzewski's work back in 2012 that actually improved results on the ImageNet dataset by a large margin and thereby started revolutionizing the field of computer vision. And since then, there's been exponential growth in the field. The attendance of the most popular conference on machine learning, called NeurIPS, has grown exponentially, and up to the point where actually in 2018 it sold out just like a rock concert in 12 minutes after the tickets were put on sale. And after that, the NeurIPS organizers actually set up a lottery system in order to even the odds of being able to participate for people. There's still a lot of excitement in the community, and there's still a lot of positive results. A lot of new results, recently improved training methods and improved architectures and so on and so forth. But at the same time, some people are raising quite unrealistic expectations. There are a lot of startups based on deep learning that promise pretty much to do anything, including strong AI and so on. And a lot of them are unrealistic and doomed to fail. And we'll see how the world reacts when many of these ventures actually tank. And we'll see whether this means that the current wave also will decline or whether things will just converge to a steady state. So this will surely be an interesting development to watch. Now this brings us to the end of this video, and I'd like to leave you with these questions here to engage with. This is also the last video for this week, so thank you, and we'll see you next week.